Welcome to DevNetwork's Developer Webinar Series. I'm Patrick Gallagher, and I would like to welcome you all to this week's featured webinar, Building and Managing High-Performing Remote Teams, sponsored and presented by Andela. Andela is a regular sponsor of the Developer Week events, and they help to build and manage high-performing remote engineering teams for hundreds of companies, including GitHub, Viacom, and InVision. Before we get started with speaker introductions, I'd like to remind you all that live chat and Q&A is available during the session on the right hand of the viewer. And there will be regular breaks in the presentation for attendees to electronically raise their hands in the chat or ask and answer questions in the Q&A section of the webinar viewer. Andela, today's sponsor and presenter, will be sending you a link post-event for access to the recording of this webinar, along with an ebook on today's topic. Make sure to tell your coworkers to check it out as well. Joining us today are your presenters from Andela. David Blair, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Andela, where he is responsible for driving the technology platform, driving Andela's software developer marketplace. Prior to joining Andela, David was the Chief Product Officer at Sonian and the VP of Product at LogMeIn. David has extensive experience with building and managing remote engineering teams. We are also joined by Michelle Vock, who is the Director of Sales at Andela. She previously spent several years managing many of Andela's partner accounts, which has given her the unique insights into the challenges that companies face when trying to grow their engineering team. Michelle has worked remotely her entire career and is a passionate advocate for distributed teams and building a remote culture. Prior to Andela, Michelle spent several years at IBM. So without further delay, please give your undivided attention to David and Michelle.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. We are honored to be here and honored to talk about something that everyone listening knows very well. And now everyone here has become experts on what it's like to be a remote employee, because that is our new reality. So we're here to talk for a few minutes about level 2 questions. If you go on LinkedIn, social media, on the news, there's no shortage of tips and tricks around how to work remote, how to build distributed teams, how to manage tools, and you get a lot of great tactical tips. But what I'm hearing and what we're hearing across the board is that there's still a lot of questions that are left unanswered. And as we experience, I know Andela is going on 5 weeks ourselves of being 100% remote. I'm seeing someone cannot hear me. I just want to confirm, can anyone else hear me as well before I continue?
Yes, I can, Michelle. I can hear you.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll continue. So we're here to talk about level 2 questions around working remote and hear from David Blair and a few tips of my own about what it's been like. So we're going to first start off with introductions, and then we're going to go into a few of our own quick tips, and then we're going to go into level 2 questions that we've been hearing from our network. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A as well. So we'll first start with introductions, and what I'd encourage you also to do is to leverage the chat and post where you're calling in from and the number one thing you would like to get out of this webinar. So please leverage the chat as we go through our introductions, and let me know where you're calling in from. So David, would you want to kick us off? Can you give us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for everyone joining the call today. Appreciate it. Appreciate you taking some time out of your day to try to learn something. We're all continuous learners, and that goes for myself included. So I'm sure I'll learn something in today's call. I think I've been a technology leader my entire career, but I think the beginnings of working remote really started probably about a decade ago, and started with some distributed teams that were co-located, working for a manufacturing software company selling to the manufacturing space. But it really got going when I joined LogMeIn. LogMeIn started with kind of remote access to computers, right? And that's what it was known for. I bet many of you on this call has used LogMeIn in the past. You could remote into a computer from, say, at work from your own home computer. And so it really supported sort of distributed working. And there was a lot of derivative technologies that came out of that. There was a product much like Zoom or what we're using on this webinar to promote video exchanges for remote teams. And we used it quite extensively, and we really got on this journey of working and supporting remote and distributed teams. I then moved on to a startup. It was a big data play, and that company didn't have the greatest brand recognition. We were a small company, about 60 employees, about 30 engineers, and we really had to compete against some of the more established brand names that could recruit really well. And one of the best ways that we were able to offer or recruit and attract talent was by offering a remote experience, allowing people to live wherever they wanted and have that quality of life where they could have a very short commute. They could work from a home office. We learned a lot of things through that, offering a completely distributed environment to our software engineers. Lots of things we learned about how to support people in their home offices, how to attract, how to really communicate effectively, how to think about remote first and putting yourself and having deep sense of empathy for those people that are not in the office, because we still had sort of G&A and marketing and leadership in an office. So it was a great learning experience. And like I said, it was a way to sort of attract talent. And then joining Andela, this is just in our DNA. This is how we operate. This is how we deliver our service by way of remote engineers. And so there's a lot of great best practices being employed here, and hopefully we can share some of those with you. And so I wanted to just sort of provide a little bit more color on my background as it relates to sort of the topic at hand today.
Awesome, David. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. We'll dig in a lot further in the next couple sessions here. As it was introduced a little bit before, my name is Michelle. The elephant on the Zoom here is that I am a director of sales here, so I do work with our soon-to-be partners of Andela. But for the last 3 years, I've spent on the post-partnership side, so working directly with engineering managers, with VPs of engineering, with CTOs on helping them scale their engineering teams with Andela and with local engineers or whatever method they use to scale their engineering team. So we would spend the first 90 days in a really robust onboarding program, onboarding engineers. We'd help manage those teams to be successful in terms of their delivery. And then we'd also help them scale when they're looking to grow their organization, which was really exciting. But the main reason I'm here is I've been very passionate about building and scaling remote teams. I myself have been a team manager for the last 3 years here at Andela and prior in my career at IBM, where we've managed teams. And I've never actually been based in our headquarters of the US office for Andela, which was based in New York. So I'm personally calling in from Charlotte, North Carolina. And just a reminder, if you could post in the chat where you're calling in from and the number one thing you'd like to learn from the session, that would be very great. So as we have navigated managing remote teams, we've learned a lot of things about what it takes to, as David mentioned, to connect with people across a video call, to understand and manage from a point of empathy, and to make sure that we are able to ensure our teams are high performing and using data to leverage it. All right, so let's dive in and then we'll get to some questions, because I know that is going to be the main point of level 2 here. We like to start off here at Andela reminding the companies we work with that there's a secret about remote work. And the secret is that remote work is not rocket science. One of my favorite sayings is that distributed best practices are really just business best practices. As you're thinking about how do you execute teams remotely, it's all about documentation, it's all about communication, it's all about collaboration, and it's all about culture. And those are the pillars we're going to talk about today, and how you have already built a remote team yourselves, but how we can continue to enhance that team over time. So again, we're going to talk about communication skills, how your team shares information verbally, non-verbally, and written. Collaboration tools, which is the tools your team uses for communication, video, information sharing, and documentation. And then culture. So these are the shared values of your team and how your team works towards a common goal. And one of the things that is really important that I think everybody here who is now working remotely can understand is that both the company and the employee need to have a common denominator of trust and empowerment, because that's really what creates successful teams, agnostic if we're in an office or distributed. But trusting your employees that they're going to do their job and not be watching Netflix, the latest documentary that's out there, and being able to actually complete their tasks that are at hand and execute at a high level. Great. So again, as I mentioned, we're going to do quick level 1 tips just to get everyone on the same page of our favorite communication best practices. Our first one is set a communication strategy. If you've been working from home for a month and you are a manager of the team, take a minute to think, have you set a quick, rules of engagement in terms of when and where your employees should send different messages? For example, when should you use email? When should you use Slack or whatever instant messaging chat that you have? When should you use a call? When should you use a video call? Think about all those techniques. For us, what we use email for is anything that is, super critical that people need to ensure that they are fully digesting. So it's documented, it's formally written usually, and it's able to make sure that everybody's on the same page about key information and sharing presentations. We use Slack here at Andela for instant communication. We probably rely a little too heavy on Slack, as I'm sure David could attest to in a minute. We use it very, very often here at Andela, but it's used for our real-time communication. We have channels for a lot of different topics, and then we default to video. So 99.9% of our calls are via video. So we're used to having these conversations in this format because we really do know the combination of video and sound creates for a really strategic conversation. The second thing at Andela we really preach in terms of communication is to calendar everything. Your calendar invite is typically underutilized, is what I'm trying to say. So make sure that you have a strong agenda that's attached there. You assign pre-work, you assign the goal that you'd like to have an output from it, and that you're assigning documentation that you would like your team to know before you get started. And then finally, as I last mentioned, many companies that we're working for probably are only using dial-ins or phone calls or cell phone, but challenge yourself to do 1 call, 2 calls, 3 calls a week where you're using the power of video. And I think you'll quickly see how much you can build a culture, and your collaboration will be enhanced because you're able to really see each other, see body language, and communicate in a different perspective. And my favorite, very simple tip I haven't seen much on the internet since we've all gone remote is to remember to look at your green light or the video camera on top. So the difference of me, on my screen looking at David's face versus telling you a story and looking you in the camera, it has a different compelling argument when you tell a story or you're making a point. So leverage the power of eye contact in video format. With that, one of the things that we did at Andela this week is we actually asked our network, now that you're seeing all these things about building remote teams, what aren't you hearing? What communication challenges do you still have? So one of my friends, Topher, he is a designer, and he sent a really great message back. And one of the things he said is, I noticed that communication dynamics are really different. It's really hard not to tune out on longer video calls, which, this is part of an hour-long video call here. So we're being very cognizant of that. There's natural gaps in conversation that get plowed over. And it's very hard for me to speak unless I'm willing to interrupt. And then finally, he says, sometimes I just open other tabs and no one can see that I'm multitasking, which I think we're all guilty of in the last 5 weeks of being remote. So we took all those takeaways and other things we've heard from our network, and we made that a level 2 communication questions. So David, I'd love to start with you with these 2 questions and what you've seen work really well for the teams that you've managed in a distributed format. So how do you replicate in-person conversations over video is the first one. And then I think the one that has been more of a challenge than any of us anticipated, or how do you keep your team focused on video meetings when it's so easy for people to multitask, when there's Google Chrome tab galore in that stance? So I will put down the slides, but we will tackle these questions head on. David, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to just harken back to and reinforce some of the things that Michelle said. I think it's really important that you are purposeful about communication. Look, being in a remote setting, you have to really work at it. You have to think about being deliberate about communication. You have to over communicate. You have to provide context for people. You don't have the ability to sort of have that hallway conversation or that water cooler where you can provide some context or shed some light on things. And so, some of the things that we do is we not only post a lot in messaging tools, but we use wikis to have information retained and people contribute to it. We also are doing a lot more with things like video, where my team is doing more and more of just short little 30 to 60-minute videos to explain something so that people can digest it easily, right? Having lots of written communication takes a lot of work, and it's also a lot of work to consume. So we're doing more and more with video. We're using a tool on my team called Loom, which is free tool, and it's very simple, and you record a little bit of the thought in your head. So I think just wanted to sort of reemphasize about being purposeful about not just what you communicate, how you communicate, and when you communicate. Because, you know, another thing that I often do as a leader is I spend some time doing reflection. And Fridays is when I do a lot of reflection on, you know, what did we accomplish, where are we going, and share that with the team. So I just wanted to add a few comments like that to just to bring to life some of the things that Michelle said. So in terms of replicating in-person conversations, look, it all depends on your personality, right? And sort of what is your style. You know, a lot of meetings may start loose, right? When you're walking into the conference room and, you know, people are still gathering and maybe there's a little bit of a sidebar conversation, or people are talking about, you know, what happened over their weekend. You still need to do those things. You still need to build a connection with people. You need to build rapport so that you all come together and understand, hey, look, we're humans first, and we need to connect, and we need to build trust so that we're effective and so that we can work effectively as a team. So you want to encourage some of that normalcy of just like, who are you as a person? Because that's something you're going to leverage in spades when you know something about your coworker or you have empathy about what they're going through. So, you know, sometimes we allow for that. We allow time for that at the beginning of a call to be like, hey, what'd you do over the weekend? Sometimes we do things like start a call with, hey, tell us a little bit about an embarrassing moment, or what was one of your biggest learnings in the last year. And it's sort of an icebreaker, but it allows for people to connect, and it does replicate some of those in-person conversations. I think, you know, when you are on video, we really try to encourage people to stay on video. Look, I get it when, you know, I think there's something in the chat about sort of, hey, where IT is a real problem in some of the rural areas or where there isn't the greatest broadband, you do have to go off video to try to conserve bandwidth. But I encourage people to try to stay on video as much as possible, because that's how you can pick up on body language and sort of that quizzical look in people's eyes when maybe you share something, and you can take that cue. There's some very real reasons to keep video on. I had an engineer who, quote unquote, was morally opposed to video on calls, and I could never get him to get on calls. And we eventually broke through. And there were some very real sort of reasons, just productivity wise. Like, how many people have been on that conference call that's just voice based, where you're like, hey, has Joe joined? Has Sally joined? Are you guys ready? Where if you're all on video, you can see that people are there and attentive and in person, and you're not wasting the first 10 minutes or 5 minutes trying to like see if people are ready. You know, those are some tips around replicating in-purpose conversations. Allow for that personal connection, check in with people, try to use video so that you can read body language just like an in-person conversation. And like Michelle said, it's critical that you set expectations coming into that meeting so that, you know, we're talking about meetings here, so that people know what we're trying to achieve. So the next question Michelle mentioned about like, how do you stay focused? Look, I mean, we do multitask. We've been programmed that way, a lot of us in the business world. I think the key here is you need to have short and targeted calls. If your meetings aren't effective and you've brought everyone across the company into them, if there's not something in it for those people, they're going to zone out, right? They're going to tune out. So you need to make sure that you have an objective, you have a set agenda, and try to keep them short. We also do things like, some of people have heard of maker days, right? In product development, it's sort of the idea of like, clear the meeting calendar and we're just going to focus on making, collaborating, building, nothing like that. So, you know, another strategy is to just try to, you know, keep all of your meetings at some certain point in your schedule or calendar, so you have time for thinking, but you can also stay focused. And, you know, that focus allows people joining those meetings to stay focused as well. Like, there's less multitasking if they know they're getting in, getting out, and then they have some free time on the other side.
Thank you, David. I appreciate all of that. I think that all of us are figuring out what's our new normal, and even for both of us, I'm sure, David, you feel the same way. I've personally have worked remote my entire career, but I think this is the longest period of time I haven't been to an office. I mean, we have typically in 5 weeks, I would have been to our New York City office at least once or twice. So getting used to that entire time of being 100% remote is definitely interesting. So I just echo a few of the things that you said there about staying focused. Sometimes you need to make sure that you can prioritize the calls that are important. Just remember that the person on the other side of that, especially as a manager, you owe them your undivided attention to understand what they're saying, why they're saying it, to understand if they're saying something surface level that you need to unpack. And if you multitask, you're not going to be able to accomplish that. So being able to be super attentive to that. So some of the things that I've done just as my personal ways to stay focused is on my computer, I'll make sure to be on do not disturb mode. If it's a very important meeting, I actually shut down Slack, email, put my phone in the other room, and make my screen full screen so I'm not seeing other distractions. So that's just a very simple tactical thing you can be doing to clear your space. And it's almost as if you're, sitting in across the room from someone very directly. And it's a way to mentally prepare yourself for being focused for some of those calls. And then from a communication standpoint as well, one of the things you can do is making sure that you can use the chats and the other functionalities that Zoom or Google Hangouts or, Big Marker here has to leverage. So we're going to quickly go on to the next topic, which is collaboration. But before we do that, I do want to acknowledge that sounds like a few people had to join late. So I just want to fill everyone in really quickly that we are talking about beyond tips and tricks of remote work. So we're acknowledging that there's tons of information out there around remote work, but we want to take level 2 questions and we want to get to the root of some of the things that we're learning now that we've been 100% remote for 4 to 5 weeks. So the secret to all this is that it's not rocket science, luckily, as we've all learned. Maybe your productivity has increased, maybe your commute time should have decreased, but there are still some things that we're learning. So we're saying that distributed best practices are really just business best practices. And we're tackling this in 3 different buckets of communication, collaboration tools, and culture. But the underlying tone is that trust and empowerment are the most important thing for remote teams. So as we move on to collaboration, which is the next topic, if you are calling in, I just want to remind you that please leverage the chat to type in where you're calling in from and what's something you want to learn today. And if you have any questions, we'll tackle them at the end. And if we don't get to them today, we will have someone follow up to you directly around it. So leverage the chat and the Q&A as we dive in. Wonderful. So let's talk about, yes, you will be receiving a recording of this as well, and you can refer back to it with the slides. So we'll move on to collaboration. The tools your team uses for communication, video, information sharing, and documentation. So we really believe you can be pretty successful with 3 basic tools. I again, now that we're talking to you all who have been remote for a whole month, you've probably seen that you need a video conversation tool, you need an email platform, and probably an instant messaging platform to share files, share information, and to have conversations. So set some policies around your team. Use the right tool for the job. Use consistent tools across teams. One of the things that we've had to streamline across Andela is ensuring that one team isn't using Salesforce or the other is using Looker and the other one is using Google Drive for different functions. We want to make sure that we have a standardized process of when and why people are using certain tooling. We also are big on documentation. So most meetings that we go to has a running Google Doc that we use for meeting agendas. So therefore we can say, hey, it's April 16th. Here's the 3 major topics that we're going to talk about today. And here's the notes. And then you can continue to scroll down in the doc and you can see, on October of 2018, what we spoke about too. And we can see where some of the trends are and some of our notes that we've noted from there. We're also big on using documentation for onboarding. So having one single source of truth where you're able to say, hey, here's all the major links that you need to know for learning about the Andela history. Here's everything you need to know as a new employee who's trying to learn about our product offering. And here's all these important links. So you have a central repository of information that you can then share out to other people. And then we're big on collaboration about having stand-ups and stand-downs. So I ask my team at the beginning of every day to send me a quick message on Slack or email and say, hey, here's my top 3 priorities for the day. And at the end of the day, they send me what they've accomplished and what their blockers are and how I can help. We also do this on a weekly basis too, to make sure that we can be successful. So now that there's a lot of tips out there, the level 2 questions we're hearing around collaboration are conversations or questions that could take place in a 5-minute meeting in the hallway now require 30 minutes. And it's really hard to keep up with my day-to-day while on video calls all day. Did I mention that we have kids running around? Our team Slack is busier than ever, but I have a hard time finding links and keeping up with updates because it gets lost in the messages. So this is from Arnold. He's one of our engineering managers based in Lagos, Nigeria. So the level 2 questions we're taking away from this, and I'd love, David, to start with you here, is how do you minimize meetings now that we're on meetings all day, every day? And then, how do you balance work, family, home, schooling, working out, eating healthy? The list goes on. And somehow, even though we're 100% remote, I feel busier than ever and hard for me to keep up with some basic things. So I wanted to position those 2 with you, David, to see your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking that question. And like I said at the beginning, I'm a continuous learner myself. So if anyone else has tips for being successful managing the home front as well as work remote, I would love them. But I'm happy to share some of my own. So the first one about minimizing meetings, some of this isn't rocket science, but something to think about. A lot of our calendaring applications have default settings, right? And a number of them default to an hour or 30 minutes for that meeting time. You could change that, right? Change it to 20 minutes, change it to 15 minutes, experiment with that and see if that really forces concise and minimal amounts of meetings. I think I mentioned previously this idea of, clearing your calendar and trying to or manage your calendar well, so all things are sort of positioned and then you leave room and time for thinking. I think that's super helpful. Those are some of the things to do to kind of minimize meetings. And again, you have to think very consciously about, I'm going to go set up a meeting. Could I do this synchronously, which is a meeting, everyone live, everyone in person, or could I do it asynchronously? If you can take the asynchronous option, maybe you should try that. Experiment with it to minimize, right? There are tools to do your stand-ups over Slack rather than doing them live. A stand-up, another tip for people, the reason why, and I hope I'm not being pedantic here, but the reason why it's called a stand-up meeting, and Michelle mentioned this, is because you're meant to do it standing up. So you get out of the meeting quickly. So you're answering the question of what you accomplish, what are you going on to next, and are there any blockers? But to force brevity and succinctness, you're supposed to do it standing up. Maybe give that a try. Maybe try to do some of your meetings standing up. That will force you to keep them short. So those are a few tips that kind of pop into mind that may be worth experimenting with. In terms of family and homeschooling and working out, I can tell you working out is the last one on the list, but I am trying. I think it just requires good planning and good structure, right? You have to have a plan. You have to sit down and think about when you're going to do each. And look, I find myself in a routine where I'm really productive in the morning, and then it's my turn to step up and do the homeschooling and kids at lunchtime and early afternoon, but then I'm back on after the kids go to bed, and there's work within the day. So it's just planning that. I would say there's also just some common sense here, but kind of the positive reinforcement and building up the positive results in a more successful outcome, right? If you're building your children up per se and reinforcing them with positive messages, just like a worker in the workforce, you tend to get better behavior, better outcomes. And, look, that comes down to style, but, something to think about, because if you're just yelling and berating and not being empathetic and encouraging, that doesn't always win the day, and it devolves into chaos sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably the secret here. It's figure out what works for you and adapt. I think take an approach and do a retro for yourself around, I feel overwhelmed in this area, but not the other, and being able to adjust your calendar and then be transparent with your team. I think the thing that connects us all right now is we're all going through this. We're all human. We all have the things on the other side of the computer that we're tackling that we need support through. So one of the things that I've prioritized as a manager is I do a check-in, a remote check-in with all my team and say, what's your setup at home? How can I help? So one of those things that I'll do is I ask if some people need an hour lunch break every day to be with their families, etc. We take a look at our schedules and see when we can actually do walking meetings. So this afternoon, for example, I have 2 calls where I'm going to just get on my AirPods and I'm going to walk around the neighborhood while we have a conversation. So yes, it takes away the video call aspect of it, but for the second call of the week that we have, we're able to walk and talk, and we get a little bit of exercise there. We also have a Slack channel within Andela, or I've seen this down on email, where we're able to do, it's called the plank challenge. So every day everyone posts that they do a 1 minute or 2 minute plank, and then you're kind of just sharing that you're able to continue to work out and do it together. I also remember when I went to visit the Nigeria office, which back in the day, they do every day at 5 p.m. they do push-ups. So they add 1 push-up every single day, and it could be kind of fun to see how many days we're in our quarantine setup in some capacity. So figure out what works for you as a way to incorporate being healthy, being part of the team, and do a walking meeting if it makes sense. So ask your team what you need. Be empathetic as a manager and a fellow teammate as well. So ask when people might need a bit more of a break to be with their family. So I think that's pretty clear, and the transparency is really helpful. Great. Anything else you'd add to this topic, David?
No, I mean, there's a lot there, but I think there's also some good questions in the queue, so we'll want to make sure we have some time for those.
Yes, definitely. Keep asking those as well, and we'll get through those at the very end. Wonderful. Great. So before we get to culture, I'm going to leverage the power of, we are about halfway through our session, and we know we're probably losing a few people here. So I'm going to ask you all to turn to your poll and answer this question around, what do you miss most about culture building in the office? So if you could please choose A, B, C, or D, and you can add your responses to the webinar chat, but just as an opportunity to say, what do you miss about culture building with your teammates in the office? Oh yeah, we can do a Jeopardy. Give a couple more minutes here. Awesome. Give it 10 more seconds. Lots of good responses. Thank you. Great. So just some of the results that we're seeing here. With number 1 response is that seems that you're all missing is 65% of you said that walking up to someone's desk to say hi or asking a question is the number 1 thing they miss about the office. And I agree with that a lot. Number 2 question was lunch with coworkers, a response. And number 3 was happy hours or birthday cake celebrations. And then we'll check the chat if there's any other things that you really do miss about the office as well. But I think that the one that you all chose, the 65% around not being able to say hi and just answer quick questions is pretty hard. But I think that's the power of leveraging a lot of instant messaging tools too, that can replicate that in a lot of ways. And one of my favorite tactical things I've done to replace that is you can integrate Zoom or whatever video feature you use with Slack, or you can definitely be able to use your email to send that, or your calendar, and just quickly just send 5-minute meetings and be able to say, hey, can you just chat for a few minutes instead of chatting about it in chat is pretty helpful as well. So our rule of thumb, if it's going to be more than 5 messages, go to video. Even if it's a cell phone call or a video call that takes a few minutes, it really is helpful just to tackle those head on. Great. So let's tackle a few culture things that we do here at Andela as tips and see if they can be, helpful for you as well. So the culture challenge we've heard is that more extroverted people tend to dominate the discussions because they're used to speaking up. So how do I make sure my team is being equally heard? I can normally read body language pretty clearly, but even with the cameras, it's hard to tell if someone is losing connection to the work. And I think that's pretty powerful as Lauren being a project manager and also project manager of a team, to note that it's important to understand people's personalities and what their driving factor is for work. So a few things that we've done here before we get to the questions. Kim, I saw you post in the chat that you do a virtual Friday happy hour and have different themes like Crazy Hat Day or trivia games. That's spot on to what we'll do too. So every Thursday we have a happy hour here at Andela. Tonight's theme, we actually have someone on our team who is a sommelier, and he's going to do a wine tasting for us. So teach us about, I think he's going to teach us about cab wines, which will be kind of a nice way to understand and get us out of the work environment as well. So on last year, we did a Halloween themed party with our engineering team that's based in our African campuses. So we had everybody dress up in fun ideas, and we had a costume contest. We gave away gift cards, and it was a way since Halloween isn't typically celebrated in Nigeria or Kenya, it was a way for us to connect the two cultures. And in reverse, we've done some things to learn a little bit more about our African colleagues as well. So the cool thing that we can do here is some themed happy hours. And then another couple ways that we've seen work really well, and maybe these are ways that are outside of Slack, etc. You can do bingo. There's a lot of online tools that you can create your own bingo games. So you can either use words that are accustomed to your company. You can do baby photos, ask everyone to submit it to one coordinator, and you can guess who the baby photo was, and then you cross off that box, for example. You can also use Google Slides and PowerPoint and some other tools to create those basic fun games that we're all used to. And then same thing with trivia. You could have everyone submit a fun fact to a coordinator, and then you could do a trivia game from there. Another thing we've heard a lot of teams execute is having quote unquote free lunch. So have your team order delivery using Grubhub or Postmates or whatever your favorite delivery tool is, and expense it to your team. So, and then you can pair your teammates with others that don't typically interact. So encourage them that they chat during their lunch break, and they learn more about other colleagues that they have. So I definitely heard that a lot of teams are executing that, which is awesome. And then finally, one of our teams, they do a series called Cribs. So every day they have like a 5 p.m. meeting where they introduce the home of where someone's staying in a Cribs kind of style show, where you get to showcase your house, your hobby, your family, your pets. It's a way to get to know people on a different level and understand kind of what worlds that they live in and what's important to them, and learn more with their colleagues. So those are just a few tips that we have here. And so the level 2 questions, David, I passed to you here is an important one of how do you ensure that all team members have an equal voice in meetings is the first one. And then second one, our company doesn't use Slack. So what are some ways to build team culture with only video, email, phone calls? Right.
Those are all great questions. Absolutely. And, things that great leaders think about, right? Because we need to drive results, and you do that through a lot of psychology of like what motivates people. And so I think those are important things. So the first question about equal voice, I think there's just something about the logistics of a meeting, right? I think it's important to understand sort of that good old RACI diagram: who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, who's informed, right? And you might that might be insightful to be like, hey, this person's just informed, so they might not have a lot of voice in this call, and that's fine, right? This is just for them to absorb information versus to offer it up. Sometimes, so that's just something to think about in terms of like, if you're worried about the dynamics of, does everyone need to have equal voice? Well, there's something that says, hey, look, what is their role in this topic? That says, hey, maybe they're more listening than they're offering. We've all been in those meetings where someone dominates the conversation, right? And that can be a challenge if it's not sort of managed or moderated, right? And so if you schedule the call, there's an onus on you to be the moderator in some sense and to help kind of create space for others. And, there are ways to sort of diffuse that person sort of taking over the meeting. And that can be like, hey, we understand that you have a lot of questions. Can we take it offline? Can we meet one-on-one and help kind of clarify and really make sure that you fully understand? I think one of the reasons why it's important to build rapport across your team is because you want to establish that sense of trust and that sense of respect. And it's really trust and respect will help with that idea of someone dominating, right? If someone understands that, hey, I can't just be interrupting all the time and have a sense of respect for others, then they do that. I think so you can. It's important to work on those things so that people understand kind of how to treat others. I think it's also important to set some values, right? And this leads into the second conversation, right? Like what do you value? I think, when great leaders onboard people to their team, they sit down and say, hey, look, they set expectations about what do they value. And if you're communicating, you value the team over the individual. If you're communicating honest criticism, but done in a respectful way, like people start to understand how they should operate in the context of your company. So I think it's always good to set values, and that helps promote the culture you want as well. Because I think culture is very much tightly associated with what do you value and doing that. So I learned some things from Michelle in her slide. So moving on to that second part of the question around culture, I thought we had figured out the theory of relativity when my team 6 years ago started doing gaming nights on the internet. We were all engineers and we all loved to game, so we were doing gaming virtually, and we thought that was like, whoa, what a way to build culture. And Michelle just took that to a whole new level with that previous slide of cribs and wine tasting, happy hours, and information exchange. So I think those are awesome, right? I mean, we used to set aside time on a Friday afternoon for people to go get a drink of choice. Doesn't have to be alcoholic. And we just connected. It was typically after a sprint and a sprint review demo, end of sprint demo, and just connect as people. And so again, there's something in that. We're all humans here. So I think that's important. I think in terms of culture as well, I think you want to allow it to evolve. Don't try to manage it, so to speak. Allow people to offer up ideas and suggestions. Just last week or 2 weeks ago, my team started using this thing called Kudos Board, which was a way to just give shout outs or thank yous or recognition to people who they thought they should. And it wasn't a tool that was legislated. It wasn't a tool that the top-down management team said, hey, we will go do this. It was sort of organic. And so allow for the team to express their personality, allow for them to evolve how you operate to be effective.
I want to comment on that Kudo board thing that you shared last week. So I'm going to post it in the chat. So I had never heard of it until 2 weeks ago. We did our first webinar, and now I filled out two Kudo boards across the team for different teammates. So David Blair was based in Nairobi and working in his team, and my team is on a totally different side of the company, but it's amazing how just quick tips like that can really help. So I just posted it in the chat, the link to it. It's a very simple way to send it out to your team. It's an easy way to fill out a card, for example, and to share quick notes and why people are important to you and what's really meaningful. Yeah, and I think, David, you had a lot of great points about just being able to connect with individuals and find a way to be what your values are and celebrate that. And I saw a comment here from Jan that it can feel lonely working from home. And one of the things that I've found as an unexpected win across this coronavirus epidemic is I've been on video calls with people I never have been before, with family members, with friends. I'm doing a paint night with my group of friends from high school in a couple of weeks. And I also was able to, I've been FaceTiming my grandma more. And those are type of things when we normally would have connected by phone. And there's some really incredible ways to celebrate birthdays, and when we're faced with a blocker and a challenge, that's what is pretty powerful about our human nature, is we can think about ways to get around it. So whether it's, the baby showers that people are driving by in their cars and waving to people, figure out a way to still celebrate those important life moments like birthdays, retirements, goodbyes, whatever it might be, promotions, and being able to celebrate that through different formats. So whether it's getting everyone together for a call that's not related to work, and just to have everyone go around and share their favorite memory about that employee, or what they really respect about that employee, is really important that people will cherish. Or filling out a kudo board and have everyone post a funny note about someone's birthday. I think those things are pretty powerful and go a long way when it comes to building a culture.
Hey, Michelle, maybe just to add on to Jan, maybe it's Jan, maybe it's Jan in Gilroy, know the town, driven through it many times, going from San Francisco to LA. Maybe just have a virtual coffee with somebody, and look, we're technologists and we always subscribe to technology, but like there's even an app for that. It's called the Donut app, and it plugs into Slack, and it will randomly assign you to someone who you should have a coffee with. And maybe you're not going to the coffee shop around the corner, but you can do it over video and talk shop.
Awesome. And I think that's a good segue to some of the questions that we're seeing here on, so it's the Donut app. I'm going to also post that in the chat as well. Love that randomization. Also, Google Sheets allows you to put a list of employees or anything you need and randomize it, which you've been leveraging on the revenue team here for random pairings too. So there's a lot of functionality that you can do to get, people across the org together that never have been there. So I would just go to some of the questions here around, David, do you know any tools to draw and to share ideas and discuss remotely? And I'll combine that with one of the questions that was in the chat around, it was pretty early on. I think it was something around, like, how do you replicate having a whiteboard in your office? What are other ways that you might be able to replicate that in a remote setting?
Yeah, great question. So look, there are a lot of whiteboarding apps out there. If you're on the Google Suite, depending on what SKU you have, there's a tool called Google Jamboard, which is typically just like creating a Google Doc, whether it's a sheet or a slide or a doc, but it's when it's under the more button, when you go to create something from Google Drive, like that is something to maybe consider as a whiteboarding tool if you're on that suite. There's a bunch of them out there. Look, I think it is difficult to sort of have the fine motor control of like a trackpad or a mouse to like get that expression and that sort of thought out of your head quickly. So look, go old school, right? Like, get a sheet of paper and write it on a piece of white paper. You might have a printer with a stack of paper right next to it. Pull some up, put it on a clipboard and draw it and show it in front of the video, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I had a whiteboard in my office in Nairobi, and I'm writing out the pandemic here in Massachusetts, but I used to write on the whiteboard and I'd be like, guys, hey, look at this. And they would look at the whiteboard, and look, that's old school and not always useful, but look, you can be creative. When we think about UI, UX designers, like we love those beautiful Envision mockups, but a paper prototype is just as good. Like you can go to the analog way of doing things often to be successful.
Yeah, I would agree to that, because this is something I've had to tackle head on, because I'm a very visual person. I'm a visual learner. I like to explain things through images sometimes versus words. And I end up having just a thing I call my scratch pad, which is essentially just a Google Slides. And I do a lot of, just before I get into a call, I'll use shapes, I'll use words. So I actually pre-do my whiteboard ahead of time and then present it to kind of share my thoughts and compel to make sure my point is really understood in a visual perspective too. So I have a lot of visual aids I use that it's not like going through a PowerPoint by any means. I'm trying to avoid that in most situations, but it's using visual cues to help drive a point across or to help people understand a little bit further, which is really helpful. I guess my last tip around online whiteboards is find your tool that works for you. I will also recommend here that everyone subscribes to Zapier's blog. So I'll post the link here. They have this great link that I've liked that they use. It's called the Best Online Whiteboards. They are 100% remote team. They always have been, and they're a great tool if you need an integration service. But they have a lot of remote best practices tip that I think are very tactical and approachable as well. So this has a good outline of why they like those best online whiteboarding tools and what you could leverage. So that's a kind of our last tip there when it comes to whiteboarding. Going back to the questions here. Oh, very tactical for Monica. Can we have one Kudo board for multiple people, or does it have to be for only one person? I believe you can customize it however you want, if I'm not mistaken. So you could say, hey, this is a birthday celebration for these 3 individuals. You could, post it. But David, do you have any more, how else you've used the Kudo boards?
I'm by no means super user of that tool. So, it's been like get in, get out, and like say what you need to say, but there probably is that ability. What is cool is like you can add GIFs and pictures and personalize it in lots of ways.
Yes, definitely. So we have about 8 minutes left. So I want to end with just a quick thank you if you need to drop, but we're going to end with some Q&A. Just before we drop off, just want to remind you that we are Andela. We bring you the world's top software engineering talent. If you ever do need engineering support, our team is here to help. You can read a little bit more about us online or on the slide. But for the purpose of today, I will just encourage everyone to post any more questions in the Q&A, and we will make sure that we get back to all of those questions right now or in an email format afterwards. We're really thankful for you all to be here. We know that this is a new normal for everybody, and one of the things I saw in the chat is the big secret adapt, and it's part of it. But there's also a lot of really simple tactics that you can leverage in the process to ensure that you can make your remote experience as best as possible and most as productive as possible. So are there any additional questions that we can answer if you want to post in the chat or the Q&A?
I love that you care about animals.
Awesome. So one question we got ahead of time that I just wanted to think about as well. David, have you seen any, there is a chat question here too. But I'm curious if you've seen, David, any unexpected outputs of being fully distributed for the last 5 weeks?
Some unexpected outputs. Sorry
Yeah.
about the child who's having a meltdown. That's
That's
with
all
the
good.
territory, right?
Comes with the territory.
I would say that the team has become more empathetic, right? We understand like what just happened, right? That wasn't cued. My son just having a meltdown, but like people have a lot more empathy for the environments that we're all living in. And I find that people are connecting a lot more just as people at the beginning of meetings, like, how are you? How are you holding up? I was on a call this morning, and the person I was talking to, it was visible that like that person feels lonely. It was visible that that person is not in a good mental space, if you will. And I know it feels a little touchy-feely, but like we just spent a little bit of time on that at the beginning of the call. So I think that is a positive outcome. I think there's a lot more empathy in the world, a lot more caring happening right now. Sounds a little corny, but.
No, agreed. And as I mentioned too, we're all going through our weird transitions, and I've had to postpone my wedding because of all of this. And I had all my bridesmaids get on a call and just shared their favorite memory of getting to know me. And then they had a cameo by Brett Favre pop up, which was really cool to just share the emotion that we're all going through together. So I really, those little things go so far, and just to connect us all and to make sure that we can really, be there for one another and share what we can. So with the last 5 minutes, I really appreciate, David, you being on here. Everyone who's posted in the chat, the Q&A as well. If there's any more, we'll stay on for a few more minutes, but really do appreciate all the questions, all the engagement. And we really hope that your new normal has been in some ways enjoyable and you're able to adapt with some of these tips. But thank you very much for joining, and appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on here, Michelle. It's always great to collaborate and talk with people.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David and Michelle, for the tips and tricks on managing high-performing remote teams. It's been very educational for me as well, just listening in, and a lot of great information, a lot of great suggestions. I just wanted this is Patrick Gallagher again from Developer Week for our Dev Professionals webinar series. And I just wanted, as a reminder to all attendees, that Andela will be sending you a link post-event with access to the recording of the webinar, along with an ebook on today's topic. We did have some technical difficulties at the beginning. Some people were having trouble getting in. We apologize for that. We will get the recorded webinar out to everybody who registered. But we do want to thank you for attending this webinar, and we look forward to connecting with you at upcoming Dev Professional webinars in the spring and into the summer, including another webinar with Andela. So we look forward to having you guys back later on, and we thank everybody for their participation. I'm not sure, Michelle, have we gotten any other questions? Just in case, I just wanted to make sure that we're not missing anything here.
There is one more that I actually think is pretty interesting that I'd love just to hear David's take on, which is, how is recruiting being impacted in this world of social distancing? That is something that is kind of curious for me, if we have time for one more minute.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, recruiting. So there's a lot less in person, let's meet for coffee and kind of network, and people are doing it much more online. I would say that, there are some companies that are being strategic, that are like thinking about like investing in like the places that they want to see real advancement on the other side of kind of what's going on with the economy. I see a lot of recruiting. I see a lot of inbound to me personally as well. Like, look, it's not a surprise that the economy is shrinking and people are out of work. But I think recruiting is becoming much more virtual. Also, like onboarding, right? Like, I mean, one of the best ways to onboard someone is come to the office, like get a lot of like high bandwidth in-person conversations quickly. And one of the things that I've been working on to be better is to have a really strong sort of onboarding document that has like a whole host of information for that candidate to get up to speed asynchronously on their own, and like call out the conversations and the people they need to meet to be effective. And it's just good planning. So it's sort of less. It's just interesting to see how like you have to plan a little bit better, but there's lots of activity happening, no question.
Yeah, definitely. And we talk a lot about tools, but there's a lot of great techniques and tools to get team members on board and even to do the interview process. And I know we've leveraged a lot of that. So appreciate those notes. And I think with that, we are finally done, but it was a really good last question.
Thanks, guys. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.